So I'm sitting here with my mom, Linda Lopez. I'm excited. You're going to hear from her in just a couple of seconds. She's going to give her testimony, and she has a testimony for a lot of women who went through a lot of struggles. And before we get started, I just want to go ahead and read a scripture that was given to me a long time ago, and I see it coming about now. And it says this in Joel 2:25, "So I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the crawling locust, the consuming locust, and the chewing locust, my great army which I sent among you. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you, and my people shall never be put to shame." And that went all the way to verse 26. And the promise that God has given us that is that we trust and we obey him, that he will restore. He's a God of restoration. So you're going to be able to hear from her, and hope you enjoy. God bless.
Hi, my name is Linda Lopez, and this is my story. My name is Linda Lopez. I come from a family of 7. My mother had 5 children from her first marriage, and my little brother and I are from my mother's second marriage. Here's my story. So I thought from the age of 4 that some magic prince would come and save me, and I'd live happily ever after like Cinderella. I grew up poverty-stricken and was raised in the projects. My family was very dysfunctional, and there was a lot of mental illness in my family. There was a lot of abuse from an older sibling toward my little brother and I. My mother was always up and down. She never had any stability, so we were like tossed around. By the grace of God, the mental illness skipped me and my other siblings. I was hit by a drunk driver at the age of 3 years old. I flew 15 feet and didn't have a broken bone in my body. And the second time I was 8 years old and was hit by another drunk driver, and I flew 20 feet and landed on the street with the busted lip and scarred knees. Again, no broken bones. We were practically raising ourselves. My mother was very numb. I was never kissed or hugged, never had the affection of a mother. My father was always in and out of our lives due to my mother's mental illness. CPS was always at our house. I would pray, let them take us, but they never did. Somehow my mom was on one of her good days when they would arrive. I remember getting our clothes out of the Salvation Army donation box. We would get food most of the time from a dumpster behind a grocery store. About the age of 13, I was sold for heroin by one of my siblings and raped. I remember wandering the streets because my mom was scary to be around, and I would just leave. In elementary school, kids made fun of me and my clothes. I had a lot of difficulty learning. I was teased a lot because my mom could not take proper care of me. I had lice more than once. I remember going to school so hungry. It was really the real reason why my mother would send us to school, so we could have breakfast and lunch. My father, when he was home, we had food, and a normal father who loved me so much, and my little brother as well. I would get so happy when he would take us to McDonald's. It was just like we were in another world, and I wanted to stay in that world. At the age of 15, I experienced my first panic attack and anxiety. I would literally live in fear and thought it was normal, and I thought being poor and hardly eating and being physically abused was normal, until I met my half-sister from my father's second marriage. His first marriage. I went to stay with her after getting in trouble for shoplifting. I was a very scared and confused little girl. My sister and PO got me counseling and help and started me on antidepressants and anxiety medication. And at the age of 16 years old, I got pregnant and had a son. All I thought was, he will not live the way I lived growing up. At 17, I moved into my father's trailer after being kicked out of my mother's house by her boyfriend. I stayed with my dad until he passed away. I only lived with him for a while. I had so much guilt when he passed away because I got in an argument with him and told him I hated him. And that same day he had a stroke and died. It really wrecked me. I met a man soon after that, and it was my first real relationship, so I thought again. He got me a house, and I learned somehow to be a mom. I would see my little boy grow before my eyes, and all I could see was love stare right back at me. I tried my hardest to be a good mom, anything opposite from my mother. I love my son so much. He is my heart. When my son was 5 years old, my niece, whom I later adopted through the Arizona Children's Home, came to stay with me. She was in my mother's care because my sister went to prison and my mother's boyfriend had molested my adopted daughter. So I was raising 2 children until I later found out the man I was living with hit my son and molested my daughter. My children were about 10 and 12 years old when I left him, and this is when it got real difficult. I filed for disability due to my panic and depression disorder, and I received disability. I was getting worse after I found out I was pregnant and got an abortion. I was so confused and found out later I couldn't carry any more babies due to the abortion. The guilt and fear consumed me. I knew I needed money, and a lot of money, to raise 2 teenagers. So since I was a dropout and had no skills, a learning disability and ADHD among other stuff, I started to lose my grip on things, so I started stripping. The first time I cried all night, but the money was good. I was in one relationship after another. I started self-medicating with alcohol, and it progressed to drugs. My relationship with my kids was falling apart. I would be so drunk sometimes I couldn't strip, so it progressed to more drugs, which was cocaine. I started escorting with some girls, and they told me how easy it was and how good the money was and made it sound beautiful, but it was not. It was gross. But I couldn't manage the money, even though I was making a lot of money. And my kids were hating me, and I had no control over my son and daughter. They started getting in trouble, and I was getting worse. My son had a girlfriend at the time, and I had my first grandson at 28 years old. My son wanted almost nothing to do with me, and what I was doing affected him tremendously. My daughter was 17 and moved with her boyfriend. I had a fiance who introduced me to crack. My son found out, and it caused a lot of pain to my kids. So I decided to go to Florida with my fiance and get clean. I did for a while. My son stayed with his girlfriend, and I wanted my son with me, but that didn't happen. My little family was a mess, and I was getting physically abused by my ex-fiance in the process. Somehow I thought I deserved it for what I did to my kids. My little family was a mess. I moved to Montana, and I wanted to leave him several times. When I first got to Montana, it was 2005, and I got a message from my daughter screaming. And somehow I knew it had to do with my son. I died that day. My son was in jail for first-degree murder. That was my wake-up call. What was a 3-day drive ended in 2 days. I remember my ex-fiance flying down the highway in the snow. I was screaming. I just wanted my son. I wanted to hold him and get him out. This is when I cried out to God, screaming to help my son, or I was going to kill myself. How did I get so messed up? I got in town, and my son's real father was on it. He was wealthy and already had a lawyer for my son. I was flying back and forth from Montana to Arizona, struggling with the fact that it was all my fault. To attend my son's court dates, it started getting too expensive. So I started getting the Greyhound. Then 6 months into all the court dates, I found out I was 12 weeks pregnant. And at the Greyhound, I miscarried on a layover. I broke. I was so devastated and suicidal, I attempted it but didn't succeed. Here I was, all screwed up. I had nowhere to live in Arizona. My only choice was to stay with my fiance in Montana and get physically abused, or he would have killed me, or to leave him and come back to Arizona, and I did. I had to leave him before he killed me in a drunken rage, so I came back to Arizona. My son got reckless manslaughter and did 4.5 years. I went to a shelter and got on my feet, married someone else, and it didn't work. I divorced while my son was doing his time. I got saved,